The storm roared across the countryside with a vengeance, rattling the windows of Noah Carter's small wooden cabin as if the world itself was trying to claw its way inside, and though he was used to weathering storms both in the skies and in his life, this one felt different, angrier, more relentless. He tucked a worn blanket tighter around his 8-year-old daughter Emma, who sat curled on the couch, wide-eyed as thunder cracked above them, and he tried to sound calm when he whispered that everything would be all right, though deep down he wasn't so sure. The roof groaned under the pressure of wind, and the lantern light flickered as if it too was frightened. Then, through the howl of the rain and the distant crash of branches, Noah heard something unusual, something faint but distinct, a cry, not of the storm but of a human voice, thin and desperate, carried on the wind. At first he thought his mind was playing tricks, perhaps the storm twisting sounds into illusions, but then it came again, and his heart lurched because there was no mistaking it, someone was out there. Against every rational thought telling him to stay inside, to keep Emma safe, Noah threw on his heavy coat, grabbed the old lantern, and pushed open the creaking door, the storm lashing against him like a living beast. The path to the woods was nearly washed away, mud sucking at his boots, but he pressed forward, shielding the lantern flame with his hand until at last the light fell upon a figure stumbling on the trail, a young woman, soaked to the bone, her fine silk dress plastered to her skin, her hair matted with rain, her shoes clearly meant for ballrooms not muddy roads, and her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she were holding her very soul together. When she saw him, her lips parted but no sound came except a broken whisper, "Help me, please," before her knees gave way, and she collapsed into the mud. Noah caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her slight form into his arms, and as he carried her back toward the cabin, he couldn't help but notice how strange this was, a woman dressed like wealth itself, wandering alone in the storm miles from the nearest estate or town. Emma gasped when her father carried the stranger inside, but without hesitation she ran to fetch another blanket, her small hands shaking as she tried to help. Noah laid the woman near the fire, stripping off her soaked shoes and wrapping her in warmth, while her lips trembled, her eyes fluttered half shut, and her breaths came shallow and uneven. "Daddy, who is she?" Emma whispered, her voice quivering with both curiosity and fear, but Noah only shook his head because he didn't know, only that whoever this woman was, she was not merely lost in the storm, something heavier clung to her, something that told him this was just the beginning of a story that would change all their lives forever. The woman stirred hours later, her eyelashes fluttering as if waking from a nightmare, and when her eyes opened, they darted around Noah's modest cabin with confusion, the polished wooden walls and flickering firelight a world away from wherever she belonged, and Noah, sitting in a chair across from her with Emma curled up asleep against his chest, simply offered a calm nod that seemed to assure her she was safe. Her lips parted, dry and cracked, and in a trembling voice she whispered her name. "Clara," the sound of it delicate yet deliberate, as though she wasn't used to saying it in places like this, and Noah, offering her a mug of warm tea, noticed immediately the refinement in her speech, the soft but cultured inflection that betrayed privilege and upbringing far different from his own life of hard labor and quiet sacrifice. At first, Clara seemed guarded, clutching the mug as though it were a shield, but as the firelight softened her trembling, Noah asked the only question that mattered, "What were you doing out there?" For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of firewood and the steady breathing of Emma, who had fallen asleep against her father's arm, but then Clara's eyes filled with something between shame and exhaustion, and she whispered, "I wasn't lost. I was running." The words hung heavy in the air, and Noah, though curious, didn't push. He had learned long ago that sometimes the truth needed to unravel on its own, but Clara's hands trembled as though her body betrayed her secret, and slowly, she began to confess more, her voice cracking as she admitted that she was no ordinary traveler but the heiress to one of the largest business empires in the country, her family name synonymous with wealth, power, and cold dominance. Noah blinked in surprise, struggling to reconcile the image of the shivering woman before him with the polished portraits he'd seen in newspapers, but Clara's tone carried no pride, only a deep weariness as she revealed that her life had been a gilded prison, one where every decision was dictated by her father, every breath measured, every smile rehearsed, until recently when the final demand broke her completely. She was to marry a man she despised, a ruthless partner chosen to secure their empire's future, a man whose very presence made her skin crawl. Her escape had been reckless, she admitted, her car breaking down miles away, the storm swallowing her as if to punish her for daring to flee, and yet here she was, in a stranger's cabin, confessing her truth to a man who looked at her not with greed or judgment, but with quiet compassion that made her heart ache. Emma stirred in her sleep and reached unconsciously for Clara's hand, and the heiress, startled at first, let the child's small fingers wrap around her own, her eyes softening as tears welled up. It had been so long since anyone touched her without agenda, so long since anyone offered comfort without wanting something in return, and as she looked at Noah, who sat silently watching her with steady eyes, she realized she had stumbled into something more powerful than any fortune. She had found a refuge, a place where for the first time in her life, she wasn't just an heiress, she was simply Clara. The days that followed the storm were calm, almost deceptively serene, and Clara began to settle into Noah's world in a way that surprised them all, the soft hum of the cabin filled with the quiet rhythm of domestic life that was foreign to her but strangely soothing, as she helped Emma with her schoolwork, braided the girl's hair with gentle patience, and even laughed freely when the child spun around the living room, tripping over her own feet in a clumsy dance that left Clara's lips curling. Into a smile she hadn't worn in years, Noah watched them, his heart quietly warming to the presence of this woman who seemed to bring a light to their little home, and though he remained cautious, aware that her wealth and secrets could complicate their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine, he felt an unfamiliar pull, a recognition that Clara's arrival was more than coincidence. One afternoon, as the sun slanted low over the hills and the scent of wet earth mingled with smoke from the fireplace, Noah and Clara worked side by side fixing a broken fence that had been battered by the storm, her delicate hands deftly tying knots while his strong arms lifted posts, and as they labored together, the air between them was filled with unspoken words, the kind that only grow in the quiet moments of shared effort. Finally, Noah broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "Clara, what are you going to do when this ends? You can't stay hidden here forever." She paused, her hands stilling on the rope, and her eyes, dark and haunted yet glimmering with a fragile hope, met his. "I don't want to go back," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, carrying the weight of years trapped in privilege and expectation, and as she spoke, Noah realized just how heavy that weight must have been, the pressure of a family empire, the cruel demand of a marriage arranged for gain rather than love. That night, by the fire, Clara revealed another layer of her truth. Her father's empire was rotten from the inside, a world of corruption, fraud, and deceit that she had recently discovered, evidence that could ruin them all if exposed, yet also evidence that she couldn't ignore without destroying herself in the process. And she confessed that her flight into the storm had been not only a desperate bid for freedom but also a reckoning with the moral and personal responsibility she now carried. Noah listened silently, the gravity of her words pressing on him as he realized that helping her was no longer just about offering shelter or warmth. It was about giving her courage, about standing with her when the world, powerful and ruthless, came looking, and in that moment, he understood the truth of their bond, not formed by wealth, not by circumstance, but by trust, respect, and a shared recognition of fragility and strength, a bond that, if nurtured, could withstand the storms of both nature and life itself. And as Clara finally leaned back against the wall, exhausted yet relieved, Emma's small hand in hers, Noah silently vowed to protect them both, knowing that this unexpected encounter had already begun to change everything he thought he knew about family, love, and destiny. Morning light spilled softly through the cabin windows, painting the wooden floors in warm gold, and for the first time since the storm, there was a sense of calm that wrapped itself around Noah, Emma, and Clara, though the weight of unspoken truths still lingered in the air, a tension that only grew stronger as Clara took a deep breath and met Noah's eyes across the small kitchen table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trembling just enough to betray the storm of emotions swirling inside. "Noah," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I haven't told you yet," and he leaned forward instinctively, feeling that familiar pull of protection and curiosity that had grown in him since the first night she had appeared at his doorstep, soaked and shivering, and Emma, sensing the seriousness in the air, paused in her breakfast, looking between them with wide, innocent eyes. Clara's gaze dropped for a moment before she spoke again, and this time the words carried a weight that made Noah's chest tighten. "When I ran, I wasn't just saving myself. I was saving Emma too." The room seemed to freeze as Noah struggled to process her confession, his mind racing through possibilities, fear and disbelief battling with hope, until Clara explained that years ago, his late wife, while working briefly for her family's company, had uncovered corruption and deceit that put many people at risk, and though she had tried to warn the world, her findings had been buried, ignored, and silenced, leaving her life cut tragically short. Clara, having discovered the hidden records, realized the truth and knew that Noah and Emma had been affected by the very injustices her family had hidden for decades. "Your wife tried to protect others," she said, her voice breaking, "and my family ignored her warnings, until it cost her everything." Tears fell freely now, mingling with relief, grief, and something more fragile, a hope for justice long denied. Noah felt an ache so deep it left him breathless, grief and vindication mingling as he reached across the table, taking Clara's hands in his, feeling the warmth of life, courage, and connection in them, and in that instant, he realized that their meeting in the storm was no accident, that the universe had led her to his doorstep for reasons larger than fate alone. Emma, sensing the gravity of the moment, crawled into Clara's lap, wrapping her small arms around her neck, and Clara held her as if anchoring herself to something real and unshakable, a bond formed not from wealth, not from power, but from love, courage, and shared destiny. From that day forward, their lives intertwined completely, Clara choosing truth over fear, Noah offering unwavering trust, and together they faced the world outside the cabin, knowing that storms would come and go, but the family they had built in the quiet aftermath of fear, confession, and compassion would remain unbroken, stronger than any fortune, richer than any empire, and blessed by a miracle born in the heart of a storm.